And hello, everybody, and welcome to another day of this Loco Festival. It is great to have you here. Thank you so much to our panelists for contributing their time and talents. Thank you to everybody who decided to participate and send pieces or read. And thanks to the audience for accompanying us in this event. So I am Marisol Marcin. I am the Global Studies Coordinator, and I am one of the organizers of the festival, and I am very proud to leave the stage to the panelists. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Marisol. Welcome to all of you. I'm Kelly Tompkins. I work in the English Language Institute, Binghamton University. And I've invited some of my writing students to be here today. So extra hello to students if you've made it. This is a really exciting moment for us. The realization of a long process in the past several months and seeing a kind of dream come to fruition. I want to give a big kudos to Dr. Marisol Marcin, who dreamt this up, who had the vision, and just started pulling people together all over campus and the community, inspiring us to make this happen, and is still being the mastermind behind it this week. So thank you. I'm super glad you brought me on your team, and it was a pleasure to get to work with people like Dr. Ellie Moore, director of the Human Rights Institute at BU, and Luz Velazquez, an extraordinary BU student, and others to put together this little piece of the festival, celebrating the power of writing to inspire and communicate. We have a lovely event planned for you. It will be equal parts inspiring, educational, eye-opening, encourage us to look inside ourselves. So I am beyond thrilled to start our session with handing the platform over to an incredible human that I have recently come to know. We're fortunate to have Drew Kahn with us. Drew Kahn is I'm going to go to his bio, a distinguished service professor at SUNY Buffalo State, where he has taught acting, devised theater, and directed productions for 26 years. He has numerous awards. You can read all about them on the full bio, which is on the Loco website. He's the founding director of the Anne Frank Project, a multi-layered social justice initiative at SUNY Buffalo State that utilizes the wisdom of Anne Frank as a springboard for the examination of genocide and intolerance through the lens of story and performance. He presents and teaches internationally on the universal language of theater and the intersection of story, conflict resolution, and community building. Most recently in Rwanda, Kenya, Switzerland, there's a huge list. Again, do see the full bio. Professor Kahn has a book, Story Building, a practical guide for bringing the power of stories to the classroom. It's used by teachers and community leaders all over the world. Has extensive acting experience in theater, film, several television commercial credits. And although he has an amazing list of accomplishments, one might think, is this the guy that fits at a session focusing on literary art, right? However, what is literature if not the telling of a story? It's the power of telling one's story that we hope to share here. And as it reads on the website of his Anne Frank Project, toward the goal of improving the world one story at a time. I'm therefore super excited to pass the floor, as we say in my speaking class, to Drew.
Wow, thank you, thank you. Thank you for truncating my my bio too. Sometimes it's like, geez, they don't have to hear all that. Only my mom will be a little disappointed with you, but that's okay. She'll get over it. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be with you today. And I realized yesterday, Kelly, we'll become fast friends and colleagues for a long time as you begin this new venture. It reminds me of the early days of when we started the Anne Frank Project. And if I can help you dodge some of the slings and arrows that are coming at you and you don't bump your head too much, I'm happy to do that. We're all in the SUNY family, and I really appreciate being involved and invited today. And I'm gonna throw a lot at you today, and in the hopes that I'll take over the screen in just a minute. right? Can I share your screen? Are you muted? Is your right? Or these are things that we're all not going to have to worry about forever. But I am gonna share the screen in a minute. But I do hope that today will open your eyes to some other possibilities of the use of story. I'm honored that I get to spend my life wrestling with stories and creating stories, surfacing stories. Buffalo State's been very good to giving me space and time, and it's really important to know that a lot of the accolades I'm very proud of the Anne Frank Project, but our engine room are 18 to 22-year-olds who choose to make a difference in the world. And I'm really honored and glad that the one thing I know a lot about, which is stories, is a useful platform for the movement of social justice and the improvement of lives. So I'm gonna throw a lot at you and talk for a little bit and show you some pictures, and then open it up to conversation. And I do want to salute Luz. And Luz, I don't know if are there any more JFU folks there, but Luz was really my initial contact, enthusiastic member of the JFU program in the summer. And Luz, I want to say hello to you. And also hello to all of our Latinx and Hispanic community on Cinco de Mayo. Just a reminder that Cinco de Mayo is really not the celebration of tacos and burritos. It's actually about the Battle of Puebla in 1862, right? And saluting the culture and that story. You know, I'll tell you a little bit more about story, but well, I'll tell you a lot about story here. I don't want to get going without pictures. All right, so give me a thumbs up if you can see that. All right. So yes, I am the director, the proud founding director of Buffalo State's Anne Frank Project. I am from Buffalo State, not the University of Buffalo. We are a unique city that we have 2 SUNY campuses. I like to think of UB, this big research one, as a think tank, and that Buffalo State as the action tank, that we are in the community getting dirty, applied research. I'm really proud. It was really fun to write Loco Festival. I liked writing that. That was fun. And I'm really saluting you and all the organizers. I know how much these things require coordinating with students and faculty, and the passion and time required. It's really inconvenient to do innovative things, so I salute you. This is our last week of classes at Buffalo State, so it's a busy time. I wish I could spend more time with you, but as you know, the last week of classes before finals is busy, and we're also trying to move our students across the stage in our quad to take pictures of an adapted graduation. So if you hear an occasional woo, that's because somebody virtually graduated downstairs. The title of today is The Power of Stories. Anne Frank Goes to Rwanda, Who'da Thunk It? And that is today's date. There's your logo down there. Go Bearcats, right? So I'm going to start in the way that we typically start. Something you're going to hear me talking a lot about is story-based learning, and that is using story as the pedagogical platform for teaching and learning. And let me give you the brief, this is a visual, this is the brief example and definition of story-based learning. We want to move the content from here to here using the body. I'll give you an example of what that means. Investing in the kinesthetic level of authentic learning. What you see on the screen right now is a Kinyarwanda word. Kinyarwanda is the indigenous language of Rwanda, which I have the deep honor of going and traveling to twice a year. I get to bring students there for the past 12 years, and we have devoted, intense relationships in Rwanda. I'm going to talk to you about Rwanda and their use of story as they've rebuilt post-1994 and the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. But the way that one of the captivating things about Rwanda is that Rwandans do things differently. And Rwanda is a teeny little country in East Africa. It's about the size of Vermont. Vermont has about 800,000 people in it, and Rwanda has about 14 million. So it's also the most densely packed country in Africa. That's saying a lot. But those of you who have been to Africa know what I'm about to say, that every story of those 52 different countries is different. And Rwanda is I spent a lot of time in Rwanda, in Kenya, and in South Africa. I'm particularly intrigued, and you'll see why, about Rwanda. So the official language of Rwanda is one you know well. It's called English. And the indigenous language is Kinyarwanda. So say after me, Muraho, Mu, Ra, Ho. Okay, so they don't just say it like, and it just doesn't mean hello. It's not a Western greeting like, hey, what's up? I'd rather not look at you. What's up, dude? Looking away. It really is much more engaging. And this is the way I love to share this story. So put your arms up. This is what you do if you were in Rwanda. You put your arms up, your heart is exposed, and you're going to look directly into the camera, and you're going to say Muraho, but you're going to think the translation. And the translation is, I celebrate your presence. Much cooler than hello, right? I celebrate your presence. So put your arms up, and you're going to look directly into the screen, and you're going to say Muraho. But I want you to think, I celebrate your presence. Do it one more time. Muraho. Good. Now look around the Zoom room like you're in Brady Bunch, right? And look around and Muraho somebody in the cell next to you. Muraho. Muraho. It's like a Muraho fest. Muraho. Right? I'm looking around the room. Everybody's smiling. So I've done that exercise millions of times. And nobody ever says, I've just Muraho'd. That was horrible. I never want to do that again, right? It is more than hello. It is understanding the most important thing, I think, about a greeting, which is I am you. In the South Africa, Nelson Mandela said Ubuntu, right? I am because you are. It is that realization of shared story. Muraho, I celebrate your presence. It's really kind of cute because we do this in all the schools that we go into in Buffalo, and we go through K through 12 schools quite a bit. And there are kids from multiple different cultures running around. They said, hey, Professor Khan, Muraho. I'm like, yeah, Muraho. It's like our tagline. I really love it. So you just had a taste of story-based learning, right? Story-based learning is using that body, once again, to move the content to the heart. You can't help but feel in the heart that sense of shared story, shared humanity. Just getting your body ready. So something I'm going to share with you now that we share with every school we go to, and when we go to schools and we go to businesses, story-based management in the corporate world, but mostly in the K through 12 schools, I'm going to share with you the exact same thing that we and my staff, my very talented staff, say when we're in front of assemblies of 500, 300, 200 young people. I'm going to look you directly in your eyes and I'm going to say a truth. You matter. Your story matters. We are here to help you tell your stories. Because if you don't, someone else will, and they're going to get it wrong. You matter. It's really important. We are living in a time of social reckoning, social justice reckoning, and that's because we have allowed other people outside of communities to tell our stories. So to me, it's really important that you know that Cinco de Mayo is about much more than the surface story that maybe has been handed down, that has been co-opted. You matter, your stories matter. When did we start this you mattering thing, right? So in 2006, and why Anne Frank and why Rwanda? Let me give you a little bit of history. So I am a theater professor. I started here in 1993, and I teach acting, and I direct plays. And in 2006, we did a production at Buffalo State of The Diary of Anne Frank. And one of the marvelous things about Buffalo State is that almost 70% of our students are non-white. And one of the horrifying things about academic theater is that we tend to produce white plays about white experiences written by white men with a lot of white people on stage. And then we ask our non-white students to see themselves on stage. And once again, our non-white students are saying, why? I'm not up there. My story's not up there. My people aren't up there. So in order to meet our very diverse audience, student audience, halfway, we had two Anne Franks. We had our traditional Jewish Anne Frank, right, hiding in Amsterdam in the annex for 2.5 years from Hitler's regime. But we also had a Rwandan Anne Frank. She was imagining herself a Tutsi hiding from Hutu extremists during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. One, we were trying to address our real audience in front of us. So there was a multiple experience. And also we were trying to release the audience of the celebrity of Anne Frank, right? She wasn't some sort of poster child who wanted to be the face of the Holocaust. She was a little girl who, like so many young people, was denied her opportunity and her right to grow up in a safe, healthy environment because of the atrocities of adults. So we started thinking, how many diaries have we missed, right? There's an Anne Frank in every genocide. Anne Frank was a gifted writer. There's no question about that. Exceptional. Her diary has been translated into almost as many languages as the Bible, right? There's a bestseller for you. So she was exceptional, but how many Anne Franks did we miss? So that production really hit a nerve on our campus that has since become the Anne Frank Project. And the Anne Frank Project is, and thank you, Kelly, for saying that, our line is, our aim is to improve the world one story at a time. And maybe today I can open up that idea of story for you a little bit and kind of break some of the barriers to realize that we're telling stories all the time. You just told a story, right? You just told a story. Even if we just breathed in to get present, right? In through our nose, out through our mouths, that's a story. That's a story. So there's our mission. SUNY Buffalo State's Anne Frank Project uses stories as vehicles for, and these are three really important pillars that I hope you remember about our work. We're not there to create actors to go to Broadway or Hollywood. We are there to use stories to teach valuable lessons in community building, conflict resolution, identity exploration. Three gaping holes in Western education. Those were not addressed directly in a typical K through 12 education, nor in college, and we need to make room for that. I'm very fortunate that I work on a campus that has made room. It's not saying that it's been easy to create the Anne Frank Project, but they have given me time to marinate and incubate this idea to become this reality, this platform for students to share their stories. Incredibly important. Inspired by the wisdom of Anne Frank, AFP surfaces and shares stories stifled by oppression. That's our work. So it isn't just a theater thing, and I really want you to remember these three pillars of conflict resolution. I've been using the term conflict management too, not because I'm trying to back out of the commitment of resolution, but because the idea of conflict is really important. And you know that in stories, no conflict, no story, right? We want conflict. How do we manage conflict? It's not that conflict changes. I know a lot of you are like, can't wait to graduate. Well, let me tell you, on the other end of graduation, there's still conflict. There's still difficulty. There's still struggle. Stories help us through struggle. Community building and identity exploration. Who am I? Who am I, right? Especially in college, that 18 to 22 marvelous journey when you are no longer necessarily just offspring of your family. You get to make new choices, right? You can eat ice cream for breakfast. And then you say, wow, I'm going to stop doing that. That makes me not feel good. Or I can stay up too late and not go to a class. Wow, I'm going to stop doing that. I don't get good grades, right? But that exploration of identity is really important through stories. The power of story is something that obviously you're talking about at the Loco Festival. Obviously you have gifted faculty that are helping you with that journey and exploring that idea. But if we get to the root of all this, before there were books, right? Before there was entertainment. The idea for stories as entertainment is historically brand new. We have a need for story. In fact, evolutionary scientists will tell you that if it weren't for stories, we wouldn't be here right now. We are wired for stories. They are a survival skill, and they do some really important things. The thing that's most important to me that you know is that stories are here to bring order to chaos. Our lives are chaotic. Stories provide structure. And by the way, when I'm saying stories, I'm saying well-designed stories with structure. Stories provide a structure. Let me give you an example of that. The sacred texts of the world, right? The Old Testament, the New Testament, the Upanishads, the Buddhist proverbs, right? The Quran. Those are really important stories because we have huge questions. Like, why am I here, right? Why is the sky blue? In Africa, if you ask, why is the sky blue, someone's going to send you to grandma and she's going to tell you a story. And it started probably with a little mischievous spider who did the wrong, right? So answers, right? Otherwise, we would be running around going, what's going on? I need a story, right? And if you think about the original story sharers, the magicians that we know as shaman, right? If there was a volcano in a village and people died, why did that happen? Well, the shaman would come and say, here's why. The gods were angry, right? We need to feed the gods. We need to remind them of how important they are, and then our crops will grow, and our families will grow. So our need for stories to bring order to chaos, to make sense out of the senseless. I'm not concerned about students coming back, and we know this through educational research, that K through 12 students coming back in the fall at post-pandemic, they're going to catch up in math, science, reading. We know that. That's how the brains are structured. We know a lot of neuroscience. What we should be really concerned about is how will they come back to be with each other again? How will they learn to collaborate? How will they learn to compromise? How will they learn to communicate? These are the things that are really important. We used to call, socio-emotional learning. Well, I guess one of the positive aspects of being locked up in our COVID caves for a year is that we have the opportunity to come out cleaner, wiser, and hopefully a bit kinder, and be more intentional about socio-emotional learning. Socio-emotional learning for most of you happened informally. Like if you had a coach that put their arm around you, you're like, well, that was great, but we couldn't count on it. So finding socio-emotional curriculum and being intentional about it is really important. It's going under that big title now called social justice education. So it's not a secret that you are all responding to stories. Our brains are literally wired for stories. I can talk to you about hours and hours about the research, but a couple of things to know. Your brain and my brain are the same brains that our ancestors had, right? So in many ways we have developed, in many ways we haven't. We are literally wired for stories. We need stories to survive. When they are hooked up into a lab and you produce really effective structured stories, it's one of the very few things that lights up the entire brain, which makes neuroscience right? That's like birthday time for neuroscientists. The whole brain wakes up. We experience stories as our own. Empathy is something that our world, certainly our nation, sorely lacks in abundance. I'm not letting out a secret, right? That's why some people aren't getting shots right now. I don't care. Right? Well, caring is really important if we are to evolve and succeed, and stories can be very helpful. When we watch a good story, I always tell my students, forget about the reviews in the papers, forget about 4 stars, 5 stars. The best review you can have for a story is somebody saying, me too. Me too. That's my story. Right? That's what's really important. So educators have been trying for a long time. How do I teach empathy? Stories are really good tools to teaching empathy. Some of the latest neuroscience suggests that our brains are wrapped in this miraculous tissue-based organism called the narrative neural net. And they're saying, several of them are saying, that unless the information that the brain receives is delivered in story, it will not be learned. It may be temporarily memorized, but it won't be learned. In fact, if there's somebody delivering, and I know you've never experienced this because you go to such a fine institution, but some students complain that sometimes their classes are boring. I know you've never experienced such a thing. But what we know about that is that when the brain is receiving information that is not structured in story, we will disregard, and the brain will start making up its own stories to make it more interesting. Right? So you know that by looking at your notes in a class, you may have said, oh, there's the information, but in the margins is some really cool stories, right? So think about your brain taking over and insisting on story. A couple things that we do with story, and this is once again not to say, hey, everybody should love the Anne Frank Project, but I just want to once again open your ideas about the possibility of story. So we do things at the local, national, and international level. Remember that little play in 2006? By the way, I never planned for the Anne Frank Project to become what it is. It's the greatest professional mistake of my life, and I'm really pleased that it has happened. But good stories beget more stories, and that's one of the reasons of the progress and the enthusiasm behind the project. So we do this work in the schools. I take my students to Rwanda in the summer, about 15 to 20 of them. They come back from that very intense experience, and they're with me for a full semester to process that experience through the building of a play. I always like to say story building, by the way, rather than storytelling, because the storytelling sometimes has a connotation of an old guy on a front porch, right? Rocking the story. So how do we build stories one component at a time? So my students are processing that experience through the building of a play that we will tour to about 30 local schools the following semester. And it's always, they're inspired in Rwanda, developed for Buffalo Public Schools. So they are about compromise. They are about forgiveness. They are about going over, achieving obstacles, what have you. And we also train teachers to use story-based learning in the classroom. It's actually the busiest part of what we do. Here's some pictures of my students doing their work. So you're not going to see sets and costumes. We never would go into a school and say, you need a lot of money to tell your story, you just need yourself. So my students play everything. So the students will say, is there rain? Yeah. Shh, you be the rain, right? Is there an antelope? Yep, there's an antelope. You can be whatever you want to be. We can't go into a school and say, you can tell stories, but you need a costume designer, a set designer, and a ton of money. That would be irresponsible. So you're looking at pictures of our students doing their work. Very often they'll wear their AFP shirts. And our students are like rock stars to those high school students. So after our students perform a play that they wrote for half an hour, they will then, and look at that, that's the lean-in factor. These are kids watching our student show. By the way, my students write 100% of the show, which is why kids like it. If I wrote the show, those kids would still be hitting the back of their seats. It's immediately cool because my students are writing it, just like you. So my students start out like this, and then they start leaning in. And they say, me too. That's a little girl saying, that's me up there. So right after the show, my students go from actor to teacher, and they facilitate a workshop activating the lessons of the show. Several schools will say, can you come by and just do the show? And I say, no. We will never, the only reason we're doing the shows is so we can get your students to share their stories. That's our transition, so you can see. And also, obviously, admissions loves us. We're a great recruiting tool, right? Because those kids are looking up and saying, you look like me, and now I can go to college. It's really exciting to be a part of. I've seen it a million times, and as I'm explaining it to you, my heart's fluttering because I'm so proud of watching those moments. It's got nothing to do with me. It's got my students and new students. So then we bring the work into the classroom. These are kids using their bodies, telling their stories. This is one of my students, one of our teaching artists now that we pay. She doesn't work for credits anymore, so I have to pay her money. And she is in there with the students, helping them tell their stories. I know that a big part of Loco Festival has to do with the refugee immigrant community, and we have a very, very active refugee and immigrant community here in Buffalo. Just short of 20,000 refugees from all sorts of difficult and conflicted areas, from the Congo and Uganda to Burma and to Bhutan and Ethiopia. So, you know, one of the things, this is a school called Lafayette International High School that caters to refugee immigrant students. And very often refugees and immigrants will come to the United States and they are told in multiple subliminal ways, this is where your story starts. Well, they have remarkable stories from their country. They have remarkable Anne Frank stories. So we encourage them, even before they learn English, to share their stories of where they're from, because they matter. And these stories are phenomenal. These people, these kids who come to us at 15, 16 have lived 4 lives in refugee camps, in what you might consider horrific experiences. And here they are saying, you're not important until you learn English. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course they are. So these are some of our students at Lafayette investing in the work, really loving it. My favorite sound in a school is that horrible sound that people think is horrible of chairs screeching. I love it because they're making room for stories. Get rid of those desks. That was all part of the Industrial Revolution, right? Sit down, shut up. That's really not authentic learning. We also do a social justice festival, and it is a hallmark and a routine on our campus, a kind of a signature event in every October. We have done 12 conferences now. We used to call it a conference, but we call it a festival now. Students like festivals, not so much conferences, and it's very interactive. So this is our latest. This one was remarkably remote, And we get about 1,000 people a day for a 2.5-day festival. And this year we realized that we had about 8 countries following us because of the remote mandate, which is something we didn't know. And we started saying, "What, you're from Italy?" They're like, "Oh yeah, I follow the Anne Frank Project." I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. I wish I would have known about that. So yeah, stories are important, right? So we've had well over 40,000 attendees. We also do a spring example of this called Youth Day, where we bring in some of our high school teachers and their students. It's all about students. You won't see me on the front line. All of my students run the festival, operate the festival, introduce the festival. The festival is a story. The festival is a 2.5-day story, just like your festival is now. So sometimes the students will say, there'll be people coming and looking for me, and they're going to have to go through several waves of students. This is owned and operated by students. It's about doing. So all of our sessions have to be 1/3 theory, 2/3 practice. Many of us have been to typical academic conferences where someone's going blah, 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 like me right now, blah, 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 and then it's over. So we wanted students to leave our festival in every session sweaty with the work, that they're doing the work, applied research, not someday I'll be part of the story process. Now I've been building those stories. Multiple disciplines, by the way. And of course, our international work in beautiful Rwanda. I'm proud to share with you that we have 3 hubs, Anne Frank Project Teaching and Learning Centers, who we communicate with often and train their teachers. And we're doing it remotely when we're not in person. And primarily we're in Muhanga, Rwanda. We're also in Limuru, Kenya, which is just outside of Nairobi. And we're also in Lausanne, Switzerland, which is about an hour outside of Geneva. I can give you more information on that anytime you want. Not what you thought Rwanda would look like, huh? That's Rwanda. That's not a special picture of Rwanda. That's Rwanda. And when I bring my students, they're stop the bus, stop the bus. I said, let me tell you, the whole country looks like this. It's an incredibly beautiful country. There is a poem that's known in Swahili, and it's known throughout the continent of Africa. And the last few lines are really remarkable. And it's something like this. The translation is, God spends his days all over the world, but he sleeps in Rwanda. When you're in Rwanda, you're like, well, God's no dummy. It's a really great place to rest your head. It's also indicative, if you've done any genocide studies, that the most horrible things happen in the most beautiful areas. Rwanda's gorgeous. There's another Rwanda picture. There's another one, incredible forests. And that's the city, right? There breaks a lot of African myths right there, right? It is like Las Vegas at night. That's Kigali, the capital city of Rwanda. It's really an amazing post-genocide recovery. Really, really fascinating. So when you hear Rwanda, you probably think, like most people, oh yeah, they had a little problem there. Yeah, that was a huge problem in 1994. So we now call this, it's no longer called the Rwanda genocide, it's called the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. First time ever the United Nations officially changed the name of a genocide. Why? Because there were a lot of deniers. We call that the second genocide. A lot of deniers came in and said, that didn't happen. Let me change the story. Let me adapt the narrative. I'm sure this is resonating with you as local politics as well. This idea of changing a story or adapting a story to take care of personal power grab needs. I'm trying to be as blatant and blunt as possible. So the UN said it's no longer called that because other people are co-opting this and changing the narrative. So we're going to call it the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. So in 100 days in 1994, 1 million Tutsi were exterminated by Hutu extremists. Now, Hutu and Tutsi, people believe that they're different people. They're all Rwandans. They actually intermarry, share the same blood, the same culture, pray to the same God. There's colonialism that came in and created a divide, and once again, we can talk about that for a very long time. But let me tell you the truth. The only definition between Tutsi and Hutu is how many cows you had. It was an economic classification. So if you had 10 or more cows, you were Tutsi. And if you had less than 10 cows, cows are wealth in Rwanda, you were Hutu. So of course there were more Hutu than Tutsi. And tensions and false narratives built up, built up, built up. It wasn't spontaneous in 1994. An event happened, but they had been rehearsing this genocide for about 30 years. What happened during those 100 days? We all know, we have it on record, and the world watched. The world did the most negative thing you can do when you're creating stories. Silence. They were silent. We knew it was happening, and we chose not to do it, like the ultimate in bystanderism. The conditions were perfect. The United States, Bill Clinton got on the world stage, and this was right after Mogadishu, Black Hawk Down, some difficult politics in Africa, and he got on the world stage and did the Hutu extremists a huge favor. He said, we are no longer, we the United States, Africa's police force. Well, if you're planning a genocide, that's great news, because America has long tailcoats, and that means a lot of people are going to ignore what's about to happen. The recipe for genocide was ready to go. What's the recipe for genocide? They're all the same. It's actually, don't even think in recipe. Think of it in terms of story structure. They have to be planned. No such thing as a spontaneous genocide. It's planned. It is systematic, cause and effect. After this, then this, then this. These are elements of story. Number 3, sponsored. You have to have support. It's really expensive, the mass murder and destruction of people and their culture. And you can have these 3 things and still not have a successful genocide. The most important thing to make sure that any conflict, especially a genocide, is successful is good people must do nothing. Good people must do nothing. You can even pare this down to every conflict you've ever had in high school. Right? I'm going to bump into that person. I don't like her. She wears green shirt. Okay, let's plan it in between 3rd and 4th period and have a bunch of you get around me, make sure that none of the teachers see me, right? Structured, systematic. I need your support. And then as soon as the teacher comes, I need you to leave. Do nothing. Leaving that kid there in the green going, what just happened to me? Right? So this is a true and tried story structure that has happened again and again and again. Read Mein Kampf, Hitler's structure of story. And also recent political activity in the West was attempting to follow a very similar structure. These are my students with teachers in Rwanda, using their bodies to change the narrative, to adapt the story. Tell you a little bit more about that story. See, these are our teachers. These are our teachers in Rwanda bringing it to their students. This is a quick story about these students who were not doing well with a small machine unit in class. They were failing the class, and down left you'll see Gilbert, one of our teachers in Rwanda, and he said, let's do story-based learning. Come on outside. Let's stop talking about these machines. Let's be these machines. Let's create stories. So they created stories about small machines, went in and took the test. Boom. Their grades went up. I'm not surprised. And after we work with the teachers, we are friends. Stories are friendship and relationship accelerators. Let me say that again. Stories are friendship and relationship accelerators. I don't think that's a soft thing. I hate that term, soft skills. I think it's more important that we become good friends and love each other than know the answer to long math problems. There, a professor just said that. Let me give you an example of how they're insisting on re-establishing their narrative. Now, you may look up Rwanda and say, well, there are some countries, particularly the West, that are questioning President Kagame. And there are multiple things that government does that are worth questioning. And I wouldn't say corrupt. I mean, before you, I really belong. I was raised to take care of your own garden before you start condemning somebody else's, right? I think we're used to what's happening in the United States, and I'm thrilled that it's been surfaced and shared more regularly in recent years. But what Rwanda did is, rather than go back to how things were before the genocide. And this is 1 million, right? Within 100 days, that's 10,000 a day being chopped up. Horrific sights. You're talking about a whole country with PTSD. Rather than going back, and this is part of their genius, rather than going back before the genocide, let's go back before the Mzungu, white people, came when things were going all right with us. Like what were the things that were really important to us? What are Rwandans really good at? Community, we before me, trust and faith, love of unity. So they call these homegrown solutions. Forgiveness is a huge part of it. And that's been one of the controversies from the West, right? Like how does the government mandate forgiveness? I'll give you a quick example. Rwandans who were put in jail, and their jails are very different than ours, who were put in jail, the whole intention is to get out of jail and recontribute to society. And once they move through their reconciliation process in jail, if I was responsible for murder and genocide during 1994, I am obligated when I am released from prison, typically 7 years, to go to the family of my victims, knock on the door and say, hello, my name is Drew Khan. During the genocide, I killed members of your family. I ask you for forgiveness. Now, there's no assumption that someone on the other side is going to say, oh, no problem, come on in, right? That starts a new story. And what they are both responsible for is creating a story, a shared story, to rebuild that relationship so Rwanda can move forward. It's painful, it's difficult, but there are stories, millions, hundreds of thousands of stories where forgiveness has happened and has benefited not only the individuals, but the village and the community. There's a different culture too about Africa that's really important to understand. If we're a bunch of grown-ups and kids at a village event and we're eating dinner and a child was misbehaving, you don't have to wait for that parent. Everybody's the parent of that child, right? Everybody's the parent of that child. So if you come to Rwanda with me, you would sit down and suddenly your lap would be filled with children. Not because they're like they're probably really amazed that you're there and you look different, you're Mzungu, but all adults' laps are available. I know that the adults are going to care for me and love me because we is much more important than me in Rwanda. We is much more important than me, the us of it. And that's how their story has been redefined. So there's a whole list of homegrown solutions. I want to share one with you. It's called Umuganda. Umuganda means community cooperation. So the fourth Saturday of every month, the entire country stops and cleans the country, from the president to the poorest villager. I'll say it again. The whole country stops and cleans the country, like hand cleans. Rwanda's spotless. It's been called the Singapore of Africa, without the consequences. So once the country is clean, then what do? Well, then you say, well, this particular village needs to build some homes. And that's what they're doing there. My students and I are helping them create mud blocks to literally, by hand, rebuild the country. Literally by hand, rebuild the country because it's ours. There's also politicians. The person in the blue cap is a mayor right there, and you see police officers, but everybody's the same in the building. Everybody's expected to participate. Umuganda. We're all going to work together to benefit our community, to benefit our country, and to rewrite our narrative on our terms. And this is the brilliance of the government, that the terms of the story, the structure of the story, are things that Rwandans have been doing since the inception of Rwanda, thousands of years. A brilliant story structure, Umuganda. So maybe now, maybe when I first said, wow, stories as conflict resolution, community building, identity exploration, maybe you were saying, how does that happen? Maybe you're getting a better sense of it now, that stories are incredible tools to transform, to improve, to connect, and to explore. Maya Angelou said a lot of wonderful things. And you're about to jump into another day of story building. So I'm excited for you. But my condition for you, for my excitement, is there is no story in silence. You can't stand on the sideline and stifle that story, because there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. You matter, your stories matter. I don't tell my students that they have a responsibility after they take my class or go to Rwanda or study story-based learning. I say you now have a respond ability. You now have the ability to do something. And doing something, and I know you're frustrated because I live in the same world you do. I know you're frustrated, but students often feel, what can I do? Writing your story is an act of social justice. Writing and telling and sharing and exchanging stories is an act of personal justice. In fact, personal justice is essential before social justice, right? We need your stories. Yesterday, we need your stories. We need you to tell your stories. And maybe your story is not from writing. Maybe your story is in the lab. Maybe your story is by playing the cello. Maybe your story is protesting. Maybe your story is painting. Maybe your story is playing basketball or hockey. Okay, maybe your story is to redesign the Bearcat logo. I don't know. Is it Bearcats? Am I right about that? Yeah, okay, good. I like to get the mascots correct. So students always ask me, when do I do this? Well, I turn to one of my heroes, Anne Frank. How wonderful it is that we need not wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. That moment is now. We're depending on you. We expect great things from you. So I hope that this is a little bit of a springboard, a little bit of trampoline into a day of reminding you how important stories are, how new entertainment is to this idea of story, and how essential they are for your personal justice, and maybe most importantly, how important they are for the world's social justice. Thank you for giving me a few moments to share some passion with you, and trying to stop. Oops, yeah.
Thank you, Drew. Wow. Thank you. Was that not amazing? I knew that you would not be disappointed. We appreciate you being here with us and sharing your heart and inspiring us in that way.
I'm hoping, thank you for saying that, Kelly, but I'm hoping that I do have a few minutes. I did extend, and I pushed my 12:45 to 1.
Oh, that's awesome.
So if you guys have any questions or any dialogue, I'm happy to chat with you about that. I know I just dumped a lot on you, but I also expect a lot from students. And you are SUNY Ivy, so I'm expecting extra much from you. There's nothing that is strange, if you ask me. I've seen a lot of strange stuff. You won't shock me. I've talked you into silence? That was
I was going to say, I'll go first. If I have a million questions. I mean, there was a lot of, I think, things that I've also been experiencing in the class and been trying out a few things. And I realized that so much of it, if I could just in my own head structure it as just tell me a story, I may get more from the students. And so this just made me think about how to rethink and reframe certain activities. And I guess my question kind of goes back to that, of the idea of students being like, so we get to this point of the semester and students want to share their stories more, Is there a way to speed up that process, or are there certain things to encourage them to bring out their stories, to share their stories?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Thank you, Trina. And you know, one of the things you've talked about is our story-based learning. I appreciate that you're connected to that idea, but it's a long bridge to walk. Like how does that happen, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I get it. So that's why we train
Uh-huh.
folks, and why I won't share any of my mistakes with you. I'll only share the stuff that
Okay.
but we do trainings regularly, and I'll stay in touch with Kelly, and we'd love you to drop in,
Yeah.
be a
Great.
part of it.
Mhm.
It's very physical, it's very kinesthetic, but I don't think that students having a platform to share their stories is an event. I think it should be a regular routine, and to weave it into students are always asking for. Once again, I've been here since '93, so there are some things that I hear over and over and over again, and I'm sure you do too. It's not like Binghamton students are like, that's a whole different mammal. I'm sure there's a lot of the same. And one of the things I always hear students asking for is space, a place and a space, right? And I think sometimes higher ed administration says, oh, you just want a lounge and couches. It's not that. It's a platform and an arena for sharing stories, right? And so it really requires a cultural acceptance and a revaluing of what students are asking for. So to answer your question more specifically, how do we build in a routine of story sharing, right, with your students? Now, I think it's really important pedagogically, and their learning outcomes you're going to see, because they feel a shared ownership and agency in the classroom. Very often it's like this, right? Western education. I'm the professor. I am professing. I'm on top of the mountain, and you're so fortunate to be in front of me, right? I'm like, no. Come down from the mountain. I'm not saying every professor does that, by the way. I'm sure you don't. But how do I share the ownership of the classroom? How do I share the ownership of the lesson? How do I share the semester with them so there's an agency and an urgency for them to participate, right? And you have to be open and available. But part of that is to establish, perhaps in the first 10 minutes, a regular sharing of story. So we're not creating, my fear is, Trina, is that we are creating, it's Trina, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You got it.
I'm reading. Yeah, I don't want to say it wrong. My fear is that we don't have enough places, and this is for faculty and staff too. We don't have enough places and spaces and platforms for sharing story. So we're creating time bombs. So don't be surprised when somebody says, right, and misbehaves. Yeah. Right, and destroys something or says something that they didn't mean to say, right? We have to provide, for lack of a better term, a slow leak. Right, so they I trust students a lot, and when I started giving them more and more space in the classroom, I was nervous. I was like, are they going to hijack the class? Are they going to say horrible things about me? Am I going to be surprised? They're right on task. In fact, they inform my teaching at such a loud level, right? That whatever they're starting with, I got to riff off of that, and they're going to riff off of that. So my lesson is not changed. My lesson is informed. By their inclusion, and you know, I go through a rotation. So Luz knows that on Monday, it's her day to share the story. She's starting the class. I think it's important to start the class too, and it could be about whatever she wants, or you can direct it, right? You know, we're talking about reconciliation in class, so can you bring in a story about reconciliation? Maybe Luz is going to say, here's a YouTube video from a favorite rapper that I like, that I want to share with you, and I want to tell you why I share it, and then they unpack that in front of you. I'm like, wow, that's awesome, right? So my 10-minute section went to 15, went to 20, and so I said, maybe we need to do a class, right? We need to respond to this and listen to this, but to make it and maybe it's not every day in a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. Maybe it's Friday. You'll see on Fridays your attendance will go up.
I like it.
You know, and this is developmentally appropriate for an 18 to 22-year-old. Their stories always feature their three favorite characters. And I know students are listening. I'm not talking about you behind you. The three favorite people, the characters, are me, myself, and I, right? And that's super appropriate for an 18 to 22-year-old. I have questions when some of my colleagues are also featuring those three folks. But that's a whole nother story. So that idea, I hope I've answered you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Sure, that's
Thank
a great question. It's a great question. What other questions do you have?
I do have a question. So thank you so much for being here. It is wonderful. I am going to tag along in your best friendshipness with Kelly, and I hope that we can work together.
And it's Marisol, right?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it is Marisol. So now, not talking as an educator, but as a student or as a learner, one of the difficulties that I find that I think relates to many people is they don't think their story is worth listening. Does that make sense? I can write my story and it's okay for me, but I would never share it because nobody would care. How do we work around those issues? What do you suggest?
You're doing it right now. And so some of the students are nodding. I see when I ask you about your name. It's intentional. That I don't want to call Trina Trena, and I don't want to call Marisol, right? Because it's your first story. And one of the things that I fight people on all the time, they're like, oh, it's Jake or Jay or whatever you want to call. I said, whatever I want to call. No, it's your story. You tell me what your name is. I do it to kindergartners and I do it to my colleagues, right? Little things like that, always reminding them of how much they matter. Marisol, I also grew up in a place of non-mattering, in the industrial education of westernized, right, education. So I was ready to work in a factory, but I wasn't ready for much else. And so those lines the lines of desks in our typical classroom are intentional for your story not to matter. Right? And I don't think it's intentional like the oppressor. I think that if you're in the industrial education and you're trying to get really good factory jobs for a bunch of kids, they got to know the rules, right? But the Industrial Revolution ended and we still are teaching people the same way. So children are better seen and not heard, right? Shh, don't say that out loud. God is watching. That one always freaked me out. I'm like, why is God always watching me? I'm in trouble all the time, right? Children are better seen and not heard. And also the first two sentences that we hear for most of our first 2 years of our life are walk, talk, walk, talk. And then after we're done walking and talking, what are we told? Sit down and shut up. Well, of course my story doesn't matter. I'm not even allowed to walk, right? I'm in prison. And I was not I know this will shock you, I was not a traditional student. I was in trouble quite a bit. Story-based learning started, my mom says, when I was in 3rd grade, because my 3rd grade teacher built a special desk for me. Her husband actually did. 3 pieces of plywood that she put on my desk so I couldn't see anybody. Because if I saw anybody, I'd talk to them. And you can't do any talking in class. I wasn't sitting there as a 3rd grader going, I can't wait to be a professor and go to Rwanda. I mean, I had no idea, right? All I knew is I was really frustrated. I did peek out and find people. Remained in trouble. But I think it's not going to happen fast, Marisol. I think that we have to provide, once again, spaces, arenas, and places for mattering. And I think circles, there's this whole idea of restorative justice circles. Circles are a good place because they're saying, listen, this may not be like the rest of the world. In this circle, we value you. Whatever you say matters. We're not going to judge you. We have a history in our lives that if we talk, you're dumb, you're an idiot, you're judged, right? So why would we share our stories? What we really need to do is shift the way that we educate from kindergarten, from pre-K all the way through graduate school. And I think mattering should be an intentional subject. We have to at every, like even when I'm asking you about your name, that's intentional. I want you to feel like you matter. Not because I work for Hallmark and I'm writing a special heart-filled card, because if the world all believed they mattered enough to share their stories, I think we'd be in a lot better place. So I think it starts small. One of the hardest things about teaching story-based learning is the teachers get it and they want to do it all really fast, like a little bit at a time. And to me, the best way to do that is to give space, time, and agency, shared ownership in some of those things that traditionally we don't really share the ownership of. I hope I answered, Marisol. You look like you were waiting for more.
I am just very excited to hear all you have to say. Thank you so much.
Sure. Sure. So think about this. The Anne Frank Project didn't exist, right, before 2006. So this culture didn't just happen. Everybody wanted it to, but you don't just say, push a button. Changing cultures is hard. Building a building that says Social Justice Center, that's not hard. Shifting the culture from which the operation of that building exists, that's different. That's different. And that struggle is a struggle that we're experiencing in our nation too. Like redefining democracy. I always find it really amusing and frustrating when the United States is pointing fingers at continents like Africa with multiple countries who are exploring democracy, like we're the experts. That's arrogant storytelling. We've done some great things in America, no question. More great things probably than horrible things. I choose to live here. But we are a baby democracy. Our story is being explored and told. So we have to give students, family members, we have to remind them that it is not only okay for them to share their stories, but essential. So when somebody speaks up, maybe at a family dinner, that was awesome. And when you're in the classroom, if somebody speaks up, maybe they're not as effective on paper during an exam, but if they speak up, I would say that's an A+. I'm giving you a grade for that. This is not extra. It's not a participation grade. So back to Trina, you have to kind of change the culture of how you grade too, right? When we get up on our feet and we're in the circle in a classroom, it is more often than not that the difficult student or that student who doesn't do so well on paper from the chalkboard to their paper excels in the circle. They look at me like, finally somebody's valuing what I do well, right? Why do we play sports? Right? Some of us may not be mathematicians, but we're excellent football players. So what do we look forward to? I'm only going to math so I can get that mattering at football. You can tell I'm not excited about your question at all, Marisol. Anything else? Any other questions? I'm happy to answer anything about Rwanda. Are you just celebrating each other's presence? Is that it? You just still hung up on Marajo? Okay.
Well, we're hoping that people from the audience have questions. I have a few of them, but I do not want to take the stage.
Yeah, where are my students? Where are my peeps? Luz, come on, start it all off.
I have a question I'll ask.
Sure. Hi, Lisa.
Hi. So, are there other ways besides physicalizing storytelling? So, I have a writing class and I get wonderful 5-page papers from, 18 students. No, we don't have time for them to read their 5-page paper 10 minutes before class, right? Like I have them read each other silently, exchange their papers and all that. But what are some other ways besides having it published in a student publication, or what are some other ways that I can efficiently but really in a meaningful way have them celebrate these amazing stories? I stand there and I get all excited in front of the class and I'm like, you should read each other's papers, and I give them the opportunity. But other than that, what can I do to really have an exchange and celebration?
That's a celebration of mattering, and I love that question. And by the way, it also brings up the greatest fear of story-based learning, and also because I'm a theater professor, people think I can't make a play. That's not in my training. I'm never asking people to make plays. I'll give you an example of what we're talking about, and maybe there is a way, Linda, to incorporate this kind of response to the work in the class. So in story-based learning, we never ask the student what do they think. Okay, there's plenty, and I'm not anti-thinking, I'm a professor, right? But I'm saying put your brains aside for a minute. I really want you to tell me how you feel. And once again, it's not violin hallmark feeling. I always share with students that when I left graduate school, nobody ever asked me to write a paper again, right? Nobody ever said, take an exam, right? But I have been asked to tell my story over and over again. And I also have been asked to process feelings. Life is a lot about feelings, right? We heard Biden speak the other night. How do you feel, right? Is very different than how do you think. We also know from some of our educational research with these neuroscientists that I keep talking about, that if we ask a student what they think, they are going to give you a very quick response to make you go away to impress the system, right? Like, this is what she wants to hear. Whew, got through, right? Students are smart. If we ask them how they feel, it's no longer about the system, it's about themselves. Now they're asking about me. So the two most important phrases in story-based learning, Linda, are, how do you feel about that? And then they say, frustrated. And then the next question is, show me. Show me what that looks like, okay? And you don't have, it's not trying to change your class into a theater class. And so to me right now, frustration can look like this. And then I'll ask the rest of the class. Well, everybody do it. So here, I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna say frustration and I'm gonna put it into my body at the same time. Frustrated. Can everybody do that? Some of you are watching, letting other people do it. Yeah, okay. So what I'm hopefully providing for you is, Linda, is a prompt for the next level of discussion, and then asking them, you guys had such amazing responses, right? Because typically when students are responding to each other's work, they're very eloquent and they're measured, right? Try not to offend everybody. But if I just show you this, like your poem made me feel groovy, right? Whatever it is. One, they're going to have a little fun, right? They'll get into their bodies and out of their minds. But also some really important central nervous system information is being directed, right? That will marry this content and your response to this content to your body. From that prompt, there's multiple ways to go, right? We can get you into small groups and say, okay, you're the frustrated group, you're the groovy group, and you're the hopeful group, right? Now we can take those responses and maybe you're going to design posters. Maybe you're going to create something on in a remote activity. Maybe you're going to create a rap. Maybe you're going to write a poem, right? So it begs this idea of moving from the individual story to the collaborative story based on feelings rather than thoughts. I'd love, your questions make me want to be with you and say, let's go inside your class. So when we do story-based learning, we do 10 hours with the teachers, and then we do a full semester once a week in their classroom. Because moving these concepts into your culture of your classroom is sacred and measured and personal. And we don't subscribe to traditional professional development, which is, here's a ton of information, now go do it. Well, I know the what and I know the why, you're really good at that, but I don't know the how. So we really spend 15, 20 weeks in the classroom with that teacher until they say, I no longer need you. So I could talk for a long time, Linda, until I'm with you. I know that sounds amazing to you, that I could possibly talk for longer. But your question, I can give, begs the next step, which is, I see you nodding. Now let's see it in action and see how it would work for you, because your classroom's different than Trina's classroom, which is different than Marisol's classroom, right? So it's very tailored. Stories are super personal. I can tell you this though, here's the guarantee, Linda. If you invest with your students in the process of feeling and kinesthetically feeling the response to each other's work, I know good things will happen. We're being asked the Anne Frank Project. You're welcome. You're welcome. We're being asked with the Anne Frank Project to serve a lot of our departments now that social justice has moved to a much more intentional level on our campus. How can we help some of those departments that really have not included social justice and want to. We're not imposing it. We're saying, if you want to, can we help? So we're being asked to come to, it's a big challenge, physics, right? Math is not a challenge to me. Some of our best story-based learning teachers are math. Anybody know why? So the structure of stories is a formula. It's math, and it's all about cause and effect. So unexplainable math formulas are explainable through story. You know that from Linda and Trina. You know that from Sesame Street, right? We weren't just talking about one. You were the number one. I'm one, right? You and I could sing a Sesame Street song now. That's called effective education. I wish all my teachers sang in funny costumes. Maybe not. I'm trying to imagine it. I have time for one more if anybody's interested.
I have a question for you,
Sure.
Professor Khan. So what would you recommend to somebody who thinks, wow, this sounds really cool. I would really like to tell stories, but I don't really know where to start. Because I know a lot of students especially might think, like students at Binghamton might think, oh, well, you know, I'm 20 years old. I've lived a pretty normal, unassuming, comfortable life. What stories do I have to tell? What would you say to a student like that?
Is it Tyler?
Yes.
Tyler, it's a great question. One, your story, Tyler, there's no shame in being raised in a comfortable world. And your stories are as valuable as that child who grew up on a refugee camp, right? It's all about perspective. I mean, if I go to some of the wealthier spots in Buffalo, the things that are important to those kids, like the right Nikes, right, are very different than if I'm in the middle of Buffalo and the kids are looking for their next meal. But those Nikes are as important to that kid, right? So I don't ever judge somebody's worth or value of story. I think their stories are always valuable. I think you start in the place you start with understanding structure and why we tell stories, right? And then also breaking, Tyler, I am sure that you are telling stories when you're not calling them stories, right? Can you share them more effectively through the use of understanding like theme, structure, style, right? And those great ideas that your professors like Kelly are sharing with you, that those are really important. And they can organize, and they should organize your protests, your clubs, your social. If you want anything to be successful, you should organize it and structure it in story. You probably already do it. I mean, fraternities and sororities are really, the ones that are successful are really good at it. They're like beginning, middle, and end. I mean, it's like they stole it from Pixar and Disney. And the ones that are less successful have not told their story well. And the same thing happens with protests, right? The protests that stay put are the ones that understand and are abiding by, consciously or not, story structure. That's why there's a George Floyd Plaza in Minneapolis, because people are camping out at night to make sure that nobody imposes on their narrative. They have been for over a year, which is why no cars can drive there and there's gardens there that nobody's touching. They completed their story. So I think you are already, and I would challenge you to be more conscious of how you are sharing information and what you call story and what you don't call story. And I would always be open, and something we were talking with Kelly and Luz about, coming and maybe giving you some tools and vocabulary in a workshop with some of my students to train you in what I mean by all this. But I think I know you're already doing it. You just don't call it that. But I understand, and that was a brave question too about, I didn't have a horrible upbringing. Why is my story important? Well, of course, things were important to you. Have you ever been upset, Tyler?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. Have you ever been disappointed or anxious?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Those are good. That's good fuel for stories. And your disappointment is no less important than a child who grew up in the Congo. It's disappointment. Your story could be shared with that person and benefited. Anyway, okay, I really do have to go. It's 1:14.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate you taking your time and clearing your schedule to have a little extra time. It was really amazing to be with you. Thank you. And maybe that training could happen sometime. How cool would
I'd look forward to it. You know, you do have your chief diversity officer is a colleague of mine. You snagged her from us, Karen Clinton Jones. I'll leave you one more quick. I think I'm based on my conversations with Karen and you. I think that we'll be there in sometime in the near future, and that would be really exciting, and we would embrace that. I'll leave you with one more quote as you're about to jump into your writing. I told you how important it was to speak out, and this is a Martin Luther King Jr. quote. In the end, we won't remember the voices of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. In the end, we won't remember the voices of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Write your stories, refuse to be silent. Thank you, it's been an honor.
Thank you. Thank you for us. I forget the word.
Maraho.
Maraho.
Okay, thanks. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye. Thank you again.
Wow. So at this point, we are going to move into our next section, which is of sharing writing. Before we start doing that, there's a link going into the chat. And we would invite you to click on that. So one of the things we're doing in this festival is collecting the information, the location and origin information of the people participating in the festival. And on our website, on the Loco Festival website, is a super cool map that's pinning all of those locations. So go check out the map at some point, not right now, and see those pins, see all those locations blowing up the map. It's beautiful. And fill this form here to put your pin on the map. And also, everyone who fills the form, the name is being put into a hat to raffle off a bunch of really cool things, some cool Loco Festival t-shirts and other lovely things. So make sure you fill that form out. I want to share just a couple of minutes before we start sharing. I thank you for all of you for being here, this beautiful panel of people that is about to share writing with us. But I wanted to share a couple thoughts of my own. I am a writing teacher, currently teaching international students how to best express themselves in a way that they can be heard, that they can be understood in this culture that they're studying in. And I think a lot about helping people find their voice and having strategies for making their voice heard and beginning to feel the power. So I was thinking today about the power of writing, which goes along a lot with what Drew Kahn was talking about. But I start my writing class every semester asking students to consider the purpose of the written word. When we think about skill areas of a language, listening and reading are both similar, they're both receptive. Writing and speaking are both productive, but what's different about writing? What's specific about this tool? How can we see it as such, as a tool, and a powerful tool? And so while each of those skills has a certain cost and benefit in the economy of communication in a second language, I think what's special about writing can be the longevity. That's one part of it, right? It's permanence. Well, speaking is pretty fleeting unless you're recording it. The written word carries a legacy, or can have the power to cross borders of time and then influence. I think that there is untapped potential, untapped power in the written word for many language learners, but maybe you feel the same. I sometimes feel the same. Language students tend to see a writing assignment like a miserable obligation, right? Like stealing their hours and their freedom and maybe becoming the perpetrator of a failing grade. But I hope for us to see that it rather holds this untapped potential to become something, to become a persuader, to become an arouser of emotion, to become like that whip of extrinsic motivation to move people, right? There's a writing assignment we do in my class that we do in all of the ELI 210 classes, an argumentative piece, right? So we ask students to take a side on an issue and try to move their reader to their side of that issue. And before we do that, in my class, we read an article about an issue, and first I ask students to see where they're at on this issue, right? What did they think about this issue? And then we read this article, and every semester we find that that not all of them, but some of them have moved their ideas after reading that article, right? Their mind changed, their perspective shifted, and what moved them but writing, right? The written word moved their thinking, which then instigates action, which is powerful. That's power. That is the power of the written word. I think a lot of people are quick to say, well, I'm not a writer. I'm not a writer. I can't write. I'm not a writer. But I'd like us just for a second to see ourselves as a writer, as we're about to hear all of these student pieces, students who dared to say, I can be a writer. I think that writing does a few significant things. Like, first of all, we should write even though we're not writers, because writing connects us to ourself. It can be a tool towards solidifying identity, asking questions like, in which way am I the immigrant? What is my immigrant or refugee story within my family line? How am I connected with the refugee that I see on media? How is social justice a part of my life? And we can work those things out with writing in ways that we might not be able to in another way. I think those are desperately needed conversations with ourselves that can happen in writing. And we'll see some of that in the next part of the festival, writing that helped to solidify identity. Another thing I think writing can do is connect us with other people, with those close to us even. I think sometimes we're not sure what to say. Sometimes we find there's a nugget or a bucket of truth inside of us that we don't know how to share, but we want people around us to know. And writing is a way to do that. And aren't we already this kind of writer a little bit, where we're texters, we're emailers, we do write to communicate some part of truth with each other. And I think that in that way, writing carries us across those boundaries that we make, that sometimes we're too afraid to share, but we can write it. And I think we'll see that today too. That is definitely some of the kinds of writing coming up next, is this connecting with each other. And finally, I think that writing connects us to the world, right? To a cause. And we're seeing that in the writing that we hear next. I love how Drew Kahn was saying, you don't have to wait, right? You can do it now. And as I've been in pieces of this festival in the last few days, and just being reminded of the huge insurmountable pain and problems, trauma all around, and what can I do? You know, what is there we can do? But then being reminded the power of writing. At least I can use the platform I have, whatever platform that is. I can write to inspire, to inform, to spread this building of awareness, to induce action, to create spaces of like-mindedness, etc. And so I think in that way, writing can take us out of our own heads and into the world to engage in those things where we don't have to feel so helpless. So writing is power. The literary works of a few students have been chosen today to be shared in this festival. What immense bravery that is, you guys, huge bravery. I think when somebody writes from their heart, there's like a little piece of your soul going into that writing, isn't there? And like, to write it is one thing, but then to be willing to share it in a public space is another thing. So those folks that are here today to share their own piece have been willing to walk in that vulnerability. Others who couldn't be here but said, yes, here's my piece, you can read it, have someone else read it. I think that's all very brave and very cool of students, of young people to be willing to do, and it gives me hope for our future. So at this point, I'm going to pass the floor to Luz, one of BU's incredible students, also a writer, who's going to introduce our authors as we go, authors and readers.
Yes, so we're going to start off today with Daniela Siniglio. She's going to present her work titled A Capitalist Critique of the Global Refugee Crisis. Daniela, the floor is all yours.
Hi, thank you so much. It tends to feel wrong giving an opinion on something that others struggle through but does not directly impact you. Increasing awareness on issues is important and necessary, but it puts something into perspective. Why me? What gives me the right to have my voice heard about a certain issue while those living and suffering through it every day cannot? They are persecuted, they are displaced, they are silenced. The first time I can recall hearing the word refugee was in my high school history class, as we briefly talked about how upsetting it was that Syria was being bombed and people's homes were destroyed. As a class, we glossed over our involvement as a country, as the Middle East was painted as some otherworldly area that did not concern us. While I had the privilege to enjoy the fruits of capitalism and the imperialistic nature of American history as a middle-class white person living in New York City, the refugee crisis continued to compound and remain inadequately addressed by our nation's leaders. It wasn't until I came to college and started learning about human rights that my perspective on everything started to shift. As I discovered the origins of the United Nations Higher Commission for Refugees and what led down the foundation for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the gears in my brain kept turning, something not sitting right with me. While this seemed like great progress, was any of it actually being upheld? Then it came to me, global capitalism and human rights cannot thrive symbiotically. The systematic impact of economic factors entrenching the refugee crisis in the Middle East and North Africa region cannot be understated. In a global capitalist system, money makes the world go round at the expense of those at the bottom. While the modernization and developmentalism of the Western world leaving out countries, it is inevitable that they are plagued with these issues at a disproportionate rate. The world as it is can be viewed through the lens of winners and losers, first world countries versus third world countries, with only the facade of help being presented. How can there be progress in the Middle East and North Africa region if it is continuously exploited? Stating that refugees have human rights that must be protected fails to suffice as an end to the issue in itself, but rather depicts refugees as pawns in the capitalist system. Through the frame of mind of philosopher Immanuel Kant, refugees are a means to an end of a global problem, which cannot be solved with a world entrenched in prioritizing capital gain over human lives. Countries all over the world will turn a blind eye to the refugee situation and ignore their part in it, regardless of their magnitude of involvement. As capitalist production turns towards demanding a continuous supply of natural resources and cheap labor, the bottom of the global food chain is targeted and ravaged. Imperialism since World War I has shaped national borders in the MENA region, ignored cultural and religious boundaries, lighting the match that ignited conflict and mass displacement while remaining bystanders. This global capitalist system holds the value of a dollar over the value of a human life, while those in power implemented protocols and commissions without addressing the core issue at hand. It's really difficult to be a global bystander and feel helpless, not knowing where to turn or how to help. While I may not have the money, the prestige, or the following, I have one important thing, which is my passion. I can spread my knowledge to others and enlighten them on this global issue, helping put our world into perspective. It's unacceptable to be complicit in a society so destructive, so vile, so entrenched in capitalism. While I feel unworthy of speaking on behalf of unimaginable situations that global refugees face, it is with honor I can exercise my privilege, while I hope and pray that someone listens. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniela, for speaking with us and just being so vulnerable with us in this space. I'm just going to ask you one question. And if anyone in the audience as well has a question that they'd like to ask, please feel free to put it in the Q&A. But we just wanted to know what inspired you to write this piece and present it here today.
Yeah, so I'm in a class about the global refugee crisis, and my professor just put this form out there, and I was like, this is the perfect opportunity to challenge myself and really a question, why are we still in this situation? Why is the world this way? I took a human rights research class my freshman year with Alexandra Moore, and as we learned about human rights and all that research, you just wonder what is making the world this way. And in my personal opinion, I think capitalism is a big problem that people are afraid to address. And it's a difficult thing to admit as a society that's complicit, but I think it's important to discuss it and talk about it. So thank you for the opportunity to do that.
No, thank you again for being here. And if no one has any questions, we'll move on to our next reader. Again, Daniela, thanks for being here with us and sharing your story as well and answering our question. I recognize we did put you on the spot there, so thank you for sharing that with us. So up next, we have Jaden Price, who is reading Next Door.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. Just to kick things off, my name's Jaden Price. I'm a freshman and I'm in the Immigration Refugee Resettlement Source Project. So I'm reading a poem called Next Door, which is inspired by my closest friend. My friend next door, a soul I have grown to adore, pretending to be princesses on the playground, folded multiplication tables as our crown. Playing tag in the classroom, dance parties up in her room, a post-homework ritual that became dear. An unfamiliar holler becomes near, capturing glowing eyes and swapping radiant smiles. Words gather, but quickly hide in extensive piles. A peace offering, a flat tortilla and tender embrace. Voiceless communication, spoken language could not replace. Downstairs awaits beans, rice, and cheese. Her mother teaches me with ease. Fill the middle, fold the edges, and tuck the sides. Telling stories about Mexico, they'd be great tour guides. At dinner, I sit amongst an unknown symphony, but their unity assures I am in good company. My friend whispers in my ear what her family is saying. They are sending love my way and praying. She takes my hand, pulling me into the kitchen, then quickly cues her cousins to pitch in. Spinning each other to mariachi, the music takes over. I disembody. A honk outside pulls me away, yet I knew that would not be my last day. The clock chases its hand. I begin to understand colors, numbers, animals, places. My growing Spanish brightens their faces. Dancing in the kitchen was merely training. Hand in hand at her quinceañera, we were reigning. Caps fly high at graduation. Wind blows a nostalgic sensation. A key still lays under our doormats, for we can always learn from each other, and that's that. My friend next door means so much more. Two households, both alike in dignity. Celebrate their uniqueness in complete unity. My family next door. Culture and love shared forevermore. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your piece, Jaden, with us. And as well, just to kind of know what influenced and inspired this piece, would you care to share with us what inspired you and what made you submit this piece here today for the Loco Festival?
Sure. So I wrote this piece about one of my closest friends growing up, and it's kind of a coming of age story. It starts from when we were really young. We met each other in elementary school, and it goes all the way up to her quinceañera, even to graduation, which has just recently happened. And I wanted to share our beautiful story of how we came together, both understanding each other's cultures, and form this wonderful friendship.
Thank you so much. And I think this is a big focus as well of our festival, and really bridging in that unity and cooperation, and understanding that instead of placing that other and kind of creating division within our society, the importance of really recognizing the beauty of celebrating different cultures and learning from one another. So thank you for sharing your piece. I know it really moved me. So thank you again. And now we'll be moving on to our next reader. So we are having Tyler present as well. Tyler will be reading a piece that is titled Distant Strangers. It is written by Jared Pine, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, but Tyler will be standing in to represent him and read his piece that he shared with us today. So Tyler, the floor is all yours.
Yes, thank you, Luz. And it's, yes, my pleasure to present Distant Strangers. I'm not acquainted with the refugee experience. I am not a parent fleeing from their war-torn hometown with their children, hoping to find safety, a warm room, food, an orphan growing up within the thin walls of a refugee camp, looking toward the sky, envious of the birds that fly so freely. A farmer forced to find work in a foreign land, devastated that the weather was too arid, the soil too cracked, the climate too hostile with every passing year. I'm not acquainted with the refugee experience. I am a white man, born and raised in Long Island, hoping to find work in the city one day, a nice apartment, a favorite restaurant, a college student living among friends, looking toward the sky, enjoying the sunlight for no reason other than to exist carefree. An American, forced to find work in a job I may not immediately enjoy, hopeful that my 20s are as enjoyable as they make it seem in sitcoms, my salary enough to afford an enjoyable vacation every once in a while. A tale of two distant strangers, a tale of two humans. As I lived my life, others scraped by. The roles reversed, just for one day. Would I survive? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyler, for reading. And now we're going to be moving on to our next piece as well. So we have Trina here with us today. She will be presenting the memoir of a Kurdish child. Trina, the floor is all yours.
I'm so used to not being muted. I almost forgot to do it. So yeah, again, it's my privilege to read this. It's a piece of a story from Hamon Darsky. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Hamon was a Kurdish refugee who resettled in the US with his family as a child in the 90s. Now full grown and with a family of his own, he reflects back. His story is shared with his permission. We moved to the US in 1996. The beginning, the first few years, was the hardest. My father went through a lot in Idaho. He was transported to Washington for surgery in 1998 or so, and had his right leg amputated below the knee due to cancer. We were all very young back then, and none of us knew much English or had money. We had a few people that helped us out back then with paying for rent, clothes, etc., and helping my father with his appointments and contacting the hospital and updating us. I believe people treated refugees much better 20+ years ago compared to now, where there is so much anger and hate around the world, especially to people who are not of your race. The world has changed a lot, and with the help of the media and previous President Donald Trump openly talking about closing borders and showing his hate and racism on national TV towards other races and religions, it has only divided humanity much more. We know how it feels to be a refugee and appreciate all the help we receive. We know what it's like to be on the other side, and hopefully people will change their mind and not be brainwashed by the media. Most refugees that come here had no choice or got the opportunity to come here to help their families and those around them. They are good and hardworking people who will only benefit this country. Growing up, we faced a lot of racism throughout school, and we got picked on many times. And each time it happened, it was mostly due to an event that was shown by the media when a group or region was to blame. For example, when 9/11 happened, we had no idea what was going on. But once the media blamed Islam and Middle East for it, we had people in school that wanted to fight for us for no reason and call us names. Just like now with the coronavirus, you see Asians being attacked and bullied around because the media, politicians have blamed China for a pandemic. Yes, in a way, we are all brothers and sisters in this world. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading that piece. And next we have Linda will be presenting Refugee, Mother Earth's Orphan, which was presented by Jasmine Morales, who unfortunately wasn't able to be with us here today as well. But Linda will be stepping in and reading the piece. So Linda, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Refugee, Mother Earth's Orphan. Stateless, a people with no home. We all desire to belong in our hearts to a land, a group, a family. The truth is, we are all brothers and sisters of Mother Earth, but difference has made us orphans, disconnected. Why is every refugee boat not viewed as a Mayflower? Why are they welcomed, but we are met with war, blood, tears? We cry, we bleed, we scream, we fear. Why are we forgotten? We are told, go home, but where is home? When will love transcend borders? Jasmine Morales.
Thank you so much, Linda, for reading that piece. And up next, we have another piece called A Country of Immigrants that was presented by Akiva Cohen that is going to be read by Marisol. Marisol, the floor is all yours.
A country of immigrants, a country of freedom, a country of family, a country of children, a country of hope, a country of immigrants. 13 colonies of foreigners, fear of the future, but look at the past. A constitution signed by refugees, wars fought by un-American Americans. Xenophobia denies our history. It neglects our past. Refugees need home, not prison. Our fears put children in cages. Our fears tear mothers away from their children. Immigration is not a foreign issue. It is our history. It is America. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marisol. Up next, I will be presenting a piece of a recent research project that was published by myself and my research team titled, It Felt Like My Son Had Died, Zero Tolerance and the Mental Trauma with Family Separation. In 2016, while conducting fieldwork in La Gloria, the largest refugee settlement in Chiapas, Mexico, I met Evelyn and Carlos and their son, David. In 1985, David's parents, Carlos and Evelyn, fled Guatemala to escape the violent civil war. Barriers to obtaining legal status and lack of employment opportunities in Mexico compelled them to seek work in the United States. Carlos moved to Alabama in 1998. Evelyn later joined him to work in an apparel sweatshop in 2000. Soon after their reunion, Evelyn gave birth to David in 2003, making him a U.S. citizen. Between 2003 and 2007, immigration enforcement increased across the country, especially in southern states like Alabama. Evelyn and Carlos attributed the rise of immigrant enforcement operations and new coverages about immigration rates of Walmart stores across 21 states to their increased anxiety, which shaped their decision to no longer shop at Walmart. Both feared that shopping for necessities at these stores or other daily activities could result in deportation and separation from their child. To avoid this outcome, they agreed it was best for Carlos to remain in the United States and to send remittances to Evelyn with her son, who then returned to Chiapas in 2007. David was only 4 years old at the time of the first separation from his father. In his earliest memory, he sits on a bus with his mother and uncle, heading from Alabama to Mexico. David described leaving his father. It was night, and I saw my father standing there at the bus stop. I was very young. He recalled that the sudden separation from his father proved to be a difficult transition, leaving him with an overwhelming feeling of sadness. David spent 7 years in Chiapas, Mexico, surrounded by friends and family, including Carlos, who later returned to Mexico 2 years after that initial separation. Eventually, however, David expressed an interest in going back to the United States to get a better education. In 2017, financial and inaccurate information shaped the family's decision for David and his father to cross the US-Mexico border without inspection, and thus surrendered themselves to border agents to request entry. Carlos thought his son's citizenship meant he could enter with him, but instead, federal agents applied zero tolerance. On the same day, a social worker provided the father a voluntary agreement form that allowed Customs and Border Protection agents to place David in provisional care with the Department of Child Services in Arizona. Carlos remained in detention for 2 months at the southern border before ICE deported him back to Mexico. His son remained in the foster care system in the United States. That is an excerpt from my research piece. If you would like to read more, you can find it online. But thank you so much for listening to that story. And it's a true story. So up next, we will be presenting a few pieces of digital storytelling that Kelly will lead us through. So thank you to all the people who spoke here today, to all our lovely panelists for being vulnerable with us in this space, and for really diving into the power of storytelling. And I leave this session saying again, as Drew Kahn said, your story matters and you matter. And we thank you all for being with us. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. We're more than happy to continue engaging in this dialogue via the chat feature as well. But if not, then I hand it over to Kelly to lead us in the next part of this wonderful literary art introduction.
That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing from your own writing. How awesome. So yes, this ends the live portion of our event. So Luz, you can unpanel people if you want to do that. Thank you so much, panelists, for being here and being willing to share your own writing or writing of those who couldn't be here. Do fill the form and mark yourself on the map and put your name in the hat for a raffle. If you can stay, we have some selections that we're going to share of pre-recorded literature, some digital stories that are amazing works centering on our themes of immigration and refugees, followed by some portions from the Poetry Foundation and some other really, really neat literary works. So I'm going to share my screen. Can I do that? And present from here. So the first segment that we want to share comes from a super cool organization called the Story Center, which is housed in Berkeley. And here's their mission statements. They are creating safe spaces to listen to and share stories, to help build a just and healthy world. And they do workshops. Possibly in the future of the Loco Festival, we'll have them here doing a workshop for us, helping us to better be able to share our own stories. But there are 8 immigrant and refugee stories that we want to share with you here. I have to share with sound, don't I?
There is a Kikuyu song that states, "Though we may be apart physically, our hearts will always be together." This line reminds me of my grandmother. She always asked me why I was named Salome and not Damaris, like her, since I was supposedly named after her. I shrugged my shoulders, and with the wisdom and innocence of a young child, I referred her question to my parents. This did not dilute the strength of the relationship that we enjoyed, the depth of the love that we shared. She called me Garana, which means namesake. And so she built a bridge between her heart and mine. As I matured, I learned that the Gikuyu culture can assign several names to a person. Names that speak volumes of the history of our people and where we came from. My grandmother was named Damaris when she was baptized Christian. But since she came from the western part of central Kenya, she was also named Warogoro, which means from the west. She was also named Nyabura, derived from the word Bura, which means rain. My parents had prepared me for the simple village life that my grandmother lived and had asked me not to expect any treats from her when I went to visit. She knew that I was accustomed to eating something for breakfast in Nairobi, where my family and I lived. One morning, I woke up and sat next to her by the open hearth where she cooked. The cup of tea that she offered me was delicious. It was a combination of fresh, unprocessed milk, black tea, and a smoky flavor, courtesy of the fire. As I waited for my tea to cool down, I noticed that my grandmother was fiddling with the ashes around the stones. Her slender fingers extracted a sweet potato baked to perfection, tender and juicy with the skin on. As she tore it apart, steam escaped, filling the air with the aroma of the ash-baked sweet potato. It wasn't the bread with butter and jam that I was used to, but it tasted even better, since I knew it was a labor of love, dug from her garden, and then watchfully baked as she prepared the tea. Grateful for this memory, I'm learning to create memories for the young members of my family, so that when they're older, they too will recall a time when life slowed down enough for us to savor our time together.
After my dad passed away, my mom told me we were just two lonely immigrants who found each other. I feel that loneliness inside of me. I don't feel a sense of belonging in any community. I'm not Filipino enough. I'm not Indian enough. Am I American? When I was younger, we used to go to India and the Philippines every few years. I remember when we visited my grandparents in the Philippines, we would go to the water every day, swim and eat barbecue from little huts nearby. My grandparents died when I was in elementary school, and my mom started visiting the Philippines on her own. I didn't return for 15 years. When I went with my mom for her 50th high school reunion, the barbecue huts were no longer there, and the water had risen such that the small sandy area where we used to go every day was gone, washed out to sea. What gets lost between waters? What gets missed in the passage of time? Where is home? How do I get there?
There is a Kikuyu saying,
I enter the portal that my ancestors created. Gurua, the legend turtle, comes to shore and carries me into the ocean, and I must remember not to be afraid of the water. Nhớ, con phải nhớ, nước là nhà. Play with the rain as you would in your childhood, carefree and naked. Let your wounds breathe. Disinfect them with salt water. Let your tears steep into the soil, softening years of dry heart layers. Dance barefoot, as you would, liberated and free. When sweat drips from your fingertips and watermarks follows the soles of your feet, don't look at it with embarrassment. Let it be the path guiding you home. Trace it back to your water source. My memories take me back to elementary school, trying hard not to get any droplets on the page as I'm writing. I inherited extreme sweaty palms and feet from my dad's side. I wonder when it began and how it's passed down our family tree. My dad doesn't know much. By the time he was born, in 1967, the family had migrated from Hue, the central coast, to Saigon, southern inland. Phong thấp hyperhidrosis is common knowing for Vit people. Still, mixture of empathy and pity from elders as they caressed my hands and said, "It's a hard life for girls to have this condition." I'm not a girl. 2002, I entered school in America. Questions like, why do you sweat so much? Ew. Why are your hands so wet? Sweating seems to be foreign. 2018, I considered getting surgery. During my consultation with the doctor, I realized I can create water by rubbing my palms together. I'm a waterbender. My ancestors, we, are water people. Our lineage connect back to the ocean spirit. Still, my body filled with fear, grief, and shame. I wonder what forces led my people to abandon our homes, to forget our roots, to be shamed out of our bodies. In the legend, Gurua, the grand turtle, carried the sword sent from heaven to help Vit people defeat invaders. I imagined I'm the sword sent by my ancestors, fighting off the colonized mind, cutting out toxins passed across generations, clearing space for water to flow and spirits to return. Nhớ, remembering what needs forgiving, what needs tending, what needs returning. My body remembers I am water flowing back home. Tôi là nước chảy về nguồn.
Sometimes when they hear my accent, people ask me, "Where are you from?" I say, "That's not the right question. You have to ask, where do you call home?" Then I think, do I have an answer for that? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. When I was growing up, my grandparents had a big orchard full of fruit trees, oranges, pomegranate, walnuts. Each season, there was something to do. Make pomegranate paste, or tomato paste, or grind walnuts. Always enough for the whole year. Every year, during the Iranian New Year's holiday in March, when school was closed, my cousins and I stayed with them. I was the eldest grandchild. It was my job to look after the younger ones, but I wanted to be alone with my books. I used to read a lot. That was my thing. To keep them busy, I created a treasure map. I drew it out on a piece of paper, gave it to them, and said, "This is an old house. There is a treasure here. Go find it." They headed outside, and after a few hours, they came back, covered with mud. And of course, there was no treasure. Now, 30 years later, all of us cousins are scattered around the world. We left Iran. My grandparents have passed away. I don't know how the orchard is now, how that house is. A few weeks after the 2016 election, I messaged some of my friends. Like me, a lot of them grew up somewhere other than here. I told them that if they ever need a shelter, my house is theirs. It was not until then that I realized that here in the Bay Area, thousands of miles away from that forgotten orchard, I'm always trying to somehow create that kind of a space with lots of plants, animals, and food, my own treasured space. One of my little cousins, who is not little anymore, visited me a few months ago. We talked about that treasure hunt and laughed. Then we went silent. Maybe we were both thinking the same thing. The treasure was in front of us, and we hadn't seen it.
The other day, I was overwhelmed, sitting on the couch with abdominal pains. The ones I get when I feel anxious, when I'm longing for my mother and the family I left behind. As I place my hand on my abdomen, my daughter comes up to me holding an egg and tells me, "Mommy, you need an egg cleanse." Bulgy. I thought of my great aunt from Oaxaca. Bulgy means the one who breaks eggs. She's the healer in our family and for all the people in the town. When I was growing up, she would come to us to do an egg cleanse. First, we had to take a shower. Then we dress in white. For each of us, she passed an egg from top to bottom, from our heads down to our feet. Then she broke it into a cup of water and salt, and she interpreted. In our tradition, it is believed that the egg absorbs the negative energy, and when it's broken into water, that energy is removed from the body. Surrounded by these rituals as a child, I continue to practice them in some form myself, even though I'm in another country. I still carry on traditions that connect me and my daughter back home with our ancestors. I still remember the smell of fresh ruda, root plant, and burning copal. I stood up and I took my daughter's hand. Together, we went to the kitchen to gather all the items to do the cleanse. I said, "Now I'll show you how to do an egg cleanse, just like Bulji did for me."
This past year, I went to Greece to do aid work with refugees. I taught English and art classes at this abandoned school that was occupied by families from Syria, Afghanistan, Sudan, Iraq, other countries too. They all learned each other's languages so they could speak to each other. They cooked together, looked after the kids together, drank tea together. I kind of found a home in that place, with all of us existing together, sharing a culture of communion. I cherish community like that, but growing up in the South as a Muslim Arab woman, community was hard to come by. My mom is a refugee from Palestine, and my dad is from Tunisia. So when I was growing up in Virginia, they always had that mentality of lay low, do what you have to do, stay on the safe side, because of their experiences back in the Bled. Then it got really hard for Arab and Muslim people like us to lay low in this country. I remember when 9/11 happened. I sat on the stairs with my mom, watching the towers burn on the TV. I didn't understand the gravity of what had happened. My parents were quiet. They didn't really talk about it, but I could feel the worry in their faces. The next day, my mom walked me and my brother to school, as usual, wearing her hijab. All of a sudden, this big white pickup truck slowed down and stopped next to us. A tall white man got out, walked over to us. I could feel my mom backing us away, pushing us behind her. I heard her whispering, Allah yastur. She kept a brave face, but her eyes were so scared. I felt her fear too. The man said, I know this thing happened yesterday. I've noticed you in the neighborhood, and I want you to know you have someone here. If anyone tries to bother you, I'm here to support you. My mom smiled at him. They exchanged numbers, and I didn't feel so scared anymore. I somehow felt at home.
Growing up in Nepal, I felt divided between two families with two sets of values. My father's side made us study at all times. My father shared stories of switching from science to liberal arts just to be able to work and support his family at a young age. So my siblings and I were expected to excel as doctors and engineers. My mother's side of the family was so different. There was education, dance, music, laughter, and humor. We envied the freedom of our cousins. I remember talking about science and maths while they shared about movies and makeup. I was an introvert, one of the quietest people in the room. However, when I danced, I lit up the room. I wouldn't miss any chance of dancing when I visited my mother's place. But at home, I danced when my father was not there. My grandmother and siblings warned me when my father was arriving, and I immediately pretended to study. I never knew why my father hated dancing so much. I secretly continued my passion even though he disapproved. I danced when I was happy, sad, angry, and stressed. Dance became part of my daily life. It helped me forget all my worries. In 2006, after completing high school, I advocated with my family to come to the US all by myself. I worked odd jobs to support myself. It was not easy, and finally I understood the importance of education. When I was 28, after many challenges, I ended up in shelter and then in a transitional housing program. There, my passion for dance was recognized and supported by staffs and residents. Dance helped me heal and made me stronger. I hosted classes at the program to give others this experience of healing. Last year, I graduated with a master's in social work. My family is happy for the education. I am happy for my chosen field. Best of all, I dance in front of a large audience, sharing my gratitude and appreciation and celebrating my life.
I always thought home was a place for me, a place where I eat, I sleep, I pray, and I feel comfortable. Home was a place that I ran back to from school, from the playground, from the street at the end of the day. Home was a place where food is ready to eat, to get shower, and to replenish my energy. Home was a place where I laughed recklessly, I cried shamelessly, I sang comfortably. But it hasn't been long ago that I came to know home wasn't a place, it was a person. In particular, it was my mother. I was born in a very small town called Saitre in Western Burma. We are ethnically Arakanix, but nationally Burmese. The town was located by the Bay of Bengal. It was all surrounded by water. Coconut trees were everywhere. Fish and seafood were the main dish. Everyone knows everyone. My mother and I had to relocate a couple of places throughout my growing up. When we finally settled in the capital city called Rangoon, I became her personal assistant involuntarily. Since my mother only spoke Arakanese, I became her interpreter for every important conversation. When she went to hospitals, when she went to fortune teller, even when she did grocery, I had to interpret for her. She totally understood the Burmese, just did not feel comfortable or confident to speak. Life happened, and I was away from my mother for a pretty long time. But just with the thought that she was at home, it filled my heart with peace and security. The ideas that she exhibited in a place where I call home made me feel home. The call that I made to the place she stayed made me feel connected, grounded, and loved. The love that she sent through conversations made me feel alive and believed in. She usually ended the call with a joke like, "When are you coming home and I need your interpretations?" Or, "I was forced to speak Burmese now as you're not around." Or, "Now you're interpreting for the people there, but not for me anymore, since I don't pay you, huh?" We both know that all the jokes she made are filled with "I miss you." It was not long ago yet all the things I took for granted from her are gone with her, and my emotions became homeless. My emotions haven't found a place to rest since she has been gone. My beliefs were falling apart. All my flowers turned black. All my rivers stopped. My existence became contradictory. Life keeps happening, and I'm here today strong enough to talk about my own story. Since my original home is gone with my mother, I have to find a new home. I started to work for people and found my connection back. I started to listen to the community people and found my voice back. I started to accept the people and found my salvation. Finally, I have built a new home in my heart with all the love and sharing from the people surrounding me now. Home was a person there. Home is a community now.
I don't know how to put my video back on. There it goes. Okay. Okay, this is going to conclude our literary art sharing session. Thank you for being here and sharing in that with us.